and welcome to the RTS Wales Annual Lecture for 2017. It's great to see so many of you here. My name is Judith Winnan and I'm the chair of the RTS Wales Centre. I'd like to start by thanking the National Assembly for Wales for partnering with us on tonight's event. And of course, I'd also like to thank Leighton Andrews, Professor Leighton Andrews, for kindly accepting our invitation to deliver the lecture. I'm sure we're in for a really thought-provoking and interesting discussion. Whilst I've got you, bear with me, if I can just have a couple of moments just to say a few words about the RTS. I'm sure everyone's heard of the RTS, but what you may not know is that we had our 90th anniversary. This is our 90th anniversary year. When the Society was formed back in 1927, its remit was to further the progress of television and give stimulus to this new branch of science. Well, I'm sure you'll agree that things have progressed and evolved way beyond probably what anybody could have imagined back in 1927. But it's fair to say that we as a society have evolved alongside. We are now an educational charity with a clear remit to promote the art and science of television. And our membership is open to anyone from whatever background, whatever profession, with an interest in the medium. And as we are a charity, I really would encourage you to join if you have that interest. You can take a look at our website where you'll find particular pages about RTS Wales and all the activities that we do, events such as this lecture, but much else besides for everyone locally. And as I say, we would very much appreciate your membership. So I'm sure we're all keen to get to the main event, so I'm now going to hand over to our chair for this evening, Bethan Jenkins, who is the chair of the Culture, Welsh Language and Communications Committee. Thank you.
Diolch, thank you, Judith. At the outset, I'd like to thank RTS Wales for organising this event and providing this platform for us to consider one of the biggest challenges the democratic societies face, and which is particularly acute here in Wales. That issue is how democracy can function properly when the democratic process is underreported, or worse, reported in deceptive or misleading ways, so-called fake news. And the problem is particularly acute here in Wales, where our indigenous print media has never been as strong as in other nations of the UK. Whatever their failings, the Western Mail, Daily Post and other Welsh daily newspapers provided a varied reflection of Welsh life and a relatively well-informed commentary on it. However, these newspapers and many others have seen huge and continuing falls in their print circulations, more than halving in the case of the Western Mail and a number of other prominent Welsh titles. Different models of journalism are replacing them, such as Wales Online and hyperlocal and community news providers. But many of us fear that platforms like Wales Online, as welcome as they are, may not provide the breadth of coverage and depth of analysis the traditional print media was able to do. This is not because they don't want to do it, but simply because the need to compete with the likes of Facebook and Google demands a different type of offer. One where content is valued as much for its ability to generate clicks as it is for its contribution to public debate and journalistic merit. Hyperlocal or community media may offer an alternative way forward, and there is some evidence that these are better represented in Wales than in other parts of the UK. Plaid Cymru recently announced a budget deal with Welsh Government where we secured £100,000 per year for local journalism grants to be used to support precisely this kind of grassroots community journalism. And I'd like to mention here the work of the Centre for Community Journalism at Cardiff University, which is doing some excellent work in supporting and fostering this sort of journalism. However, hyperlocal media is unlikely to be able to fully replace the decline in more traditional print media, and is also competing for attention against the likes of Facebook and Google. BBC and ITN, of course, continue to provide generally excellent content, comprehensive and high-quality news and journalism. Despite this, many of us feel that UK broadcast media's reporting and portrayal of Wales, of our lives and concerns, is often marginal and is no substitute for vibrant and genuinely local community journalism rooted in our communities and with a clear understanding of Welsh society. The BBC is currently rolling out plans to support local journalism in Wales and elsewhere across the UK. But this also raises questions, to which the answers are far from clear, about whether this sort of initiative may, instead of supporting local journalism, simply replace local print journalists with those employed by the BBC. And of course, the broadcast media itself is not immune to competition from the internet, from the likes of Google, Twitter and Facebook, as has already been mentioned. In the publicity material for this event, the question was raised as to whether Facebook, which Ofcom recognises is a media organisation, should be brought within the scope of media regulation. Rwy'n sicr y bydd Leighton, Andrews yn rhoi sylw i hyn yn ei ddarlith ac rwy'n edrych ymlaen at glywed beth sydd ganddo i'w ddweud. Beth bynnag yw ein barn am y cwestiwn hwnnw, mae'r atebion yng Nghymru yn debygol o fod yn anoddach nag mewn mannau eraill. Mae natur gymharol wan a darniog ein cyfryngau print gynhenid yn un reswm dros hyn, ond reswm arall yw nad yw'r setliad datganoli presennol yn darparu'r deddfwriaeth a'r rheoleiddio i fynd i'r afael yr mater yn uniongyrchol. Nad oes gan y cynulliad pwerau ffurfiol yn y maes hwn ar hyn o bryd, rwy'n credu bod yna gonsensws erbyn hyn fod angen i sefydliadau cyfryngau eraill sy'n gweithredu yng Nghymru fod yn atebol i'r cynulliad cenedlaethol o ran eu cyfrifoldebau a'i hymrymiadau yng Nghymru. Cafodd Pwyllgor Diwylliant y Gymraeg a chyfathrebu, a roedd fi'n gadeirydd arno, ei sefydlu'n rhannol i fynd i'r afael ar angen hwn ac i fod yn gyfrwng iddi. Ar hyn o bryd, mae'r Pwyllgor yn edrych ar newyddion lleol yng Nghymru. Rydym yn edrych i weld beth ellir ei wneud o fewn cyfyngiadau pŵer presennol y cynulliad i feithrin a gwella newyddiaduriaeth lleol yng Nghymru. Fodd bynnag, ni waith pa heriau yma hyn yn ei gyflwyno, mae nhw'n fach o'i gymharu'r cwestiwn ehangach o sut y gall cyfryngau cymdeithasol helpu i gefnogi trafodaeth democrataidd mewn ffordd cadarnhaol. Ac i orffen, does dim angen fawr o gyflwyniad ar Leighton Andrews, mae'n siŵr. Mae wedi cael gyrfa hir a nodedig yn y sectorau preifat a chyhoeddus, ac wrth gwrs roedd yn weinidog medrus iawn yn Llywodraeth Cymru, ac adnabyddus am herio'r hyn a roedd yn ei weld fel safbwyntiau a buddiannau disymud. Yn ddiweddar, mae wedi cadeirio'r tasglu newyddion digidol i'r llywydd, ac mae'r tasglu wedi gwneud rhai argymhellion diddorol a phrofoclyd, mae'n rhaid fi dweud. Roedd Leighton yn minnau wrth gwrs yn gwrthwynebwyr gwleidyddol, ond wrth reswm ddim bob amser yn cytuno ar bopeth. Yn arbennig, mae rhai o'i safbwyntiau ynghylch mynd ar fet yn rhywbeth y byddai'n well i ni beidio ei trafod, mae'n debyg. Ond gweithaf ein gwahaniaethau gwleidyddol, rydym ni hefyd yn rhannu ymrwymiad dwfn i ddatganoli ar broses ddemocrataidd. Ac mae'n rhywun mae gen i parch iddo ac sydd yn werth ei gwrando arno bob tro yn credu. Felly, nhw'n edrych ymlaen yn fawr at glywed beth sydd gan Leighton Andrews i ddweud heno, ac yna clywed cwestiynau falle pryfoclyd, heriol, gynnwch chi fel gynulleidfa yma heno. Mae siawns ydych chi nawr i ofyn i gynweinidog, falle bod chi heb cael y cyfle o'r blaen, i ofyn cwestiynau iddo fe am nifer o bynciau penodol, nifer o bynciau diddorol yma heno. Felly, hoffwn i groesawu Leighton Andrews i rhoi y ddarlith i chi yma heno. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Wel, noswaith dda, diolch Bethan, diolch Judith. Some of you may not know that I spent 13 years as an elected politician. For 15 years before that, I was heavily involved in issues of media policy and regulation in the UK and at a European Union level. And this lecture tonight will take me back to some of those kinds of issues. Right, now, hands up. How many of you have a Facebook account? Okay, most people in the room. Congratulations. We're all laboring for free in Mark Zuckerberg's data mines. So this evening's lecture, I'm going to talk about Facebook. I'm going to talk about its impact on the media, its impact on democracy, and the need for regulation. Let me start by acknowledging that Facebook brings many civic benefits. And its mission, of course, as Mark Zuckerberg has outlined, is to give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. Who couldn't object to that? It's enabled, as some researchers have said, a dramatic expansion and differentiation of public communication, when people primarily use it to keep in touch with friends or with family. And civic groups use it to organise. There is a group in my former constituency called the Rhondda Tunnel Society. They would never have got the membership and activist base and support without the use of Facebook. I know Bethan would rather they were called the Blind Gwynfi Tunnel Society because she represents the other side of the tunnel, or the other side of the mountain. Anyway, Facebook has also created a public space for Welsh speakers. You know, it's been translated as a platform into Welsh by Welsh speakers, so it creates a new public space for minority communities, and it's become a platform for protest movements and social movements across the world. This is on the right there of the screen, My Stealthy Freedom, Iranian women posting selfies without veils. It's become an immensely popular Facebook site. It's just one example amongst many. But Facebook is immensely powerful. 2 billion users, 2/3 of whom use it daily. Users spend about nearly an hour a day on Facebook. It says it's a new kind of company. It's not a media company. It has a market capitalization of $445 billion. It owns WhatsApp, Instagram, and of course Facebook Messenger. It's dominant in mobile digital advertising. It lies largely outside UK and EU media regulation. And as Professor Rasmus Kleis Nielsen of Oxford University has said, it now reaches more people with news than any media organization in the world. Facebook is a walled garden. Through its newsfeed algorithm, its design, its power over other apps and partners, and through its advertising methodology, Facebook wants to keep you within its walled garden. I'll come on to talk about that, how the newsfeed algorithm has been regularly tweaked to engage your interest or addiction, how its design means advertisements have similar styles to posts, how shared news posts don't often always carry the originating media's brand, and how Facebook seeks to use its power over other apps to watch videos or look at other content within Facebook itself. And I'll talk a little bit about its advertising, how that's based on the data it collects upon you. Facebook is engaged in a battle for attention, and Tim Wu has written the book, The Attention Merchants. He's the author of the campaign many years ago for net neutrality in the States, professor of law, a book well worth reading explaining precisely how the internet intermediaries are designed to capture and hold your attention. Facebook's newsfeed algorithm. What appears in your newsfeed is not about newsworthiness or even about chronology. It's about stickiness or engagement. It's about what will keep you hooked on the site. Everyone's newsfeed is different. The algorithm looks at 2,000 features, evaluates 2,000 features in determining what you see. And as a Facebook user, you are likely to see only about 1/5 of what is posted by your friends and followers. The algorithm picks and orders the posts. Your interactions may have an impact on the algorithm. Sharing an item is worth more than commenting. Commenting is worth more than liking. But we don't know how much impact you have compared to the algorithm itself. Adam Mosseri, who's the Vice President of Product Development for Facebook Newsfeed, said a while back, "We believe focusing on the user experience means that over the long run, more and more people will use Facebook. They'll spend more time on it, and that'll be good for them, good for Facebook, and good for publishers. Their commercial motivation is transparent and clear." And we need to remember that the newsfeed generated $17 billion in advertising revenues in the first 6 months of 2017. Facebook advertisements have similar branding to posts. It's a post I made just a month ago on the 20th anniversary of the devolution referendum. On the right is an advertisement for something called My Social Book. It's got the same style as the posts. It's been shared or liked by people who are in my list of friends, so it comes up showing that they've liked it, but it is actually an advertisement. As Mark Zuckerberg said when he introduced Facebook advertising, nothing influences people more than a recommendation from a trusted friend. A trusted referral is the holy grail of advertising. Shared news items don't always carry the logo of the originating publisher. This is Dominic Cummings, who was the campaign director for Vote Leave. I've only met him once when he used to be the special advisor to Michael Gove. When I was in a meeting with him, Matt Greenoff, my former special advisor, was in that meeting as well. He will remember it. You can see here, this was actually an independent news item from the independent newspaper, but when it's shared on Facebook, the independent logo disappears. And research by the Reuters Institute in Oxford says that only around a third of people say they notice the brand in social networks most or all of the time, meaning that the impact of the original news publisher is diminished. Facebook wants you to watch videos and look at other content within Facebook. Matt, you posted this, that's Matt Greenoff, you posted this on Facebook at the weekend. It's a rather cheesy song I found when I clicked on it. Now, you can watch it within Facebook. They want you to watch it. You could exit and listen to it on SoundCloud if you want to. People are trying to keep you within it. If you click on your own profile under More, you will find a link to Instagram. Now, I may have signed in one of those long documents or clicked on the approval for Facebook to merge my Instagram account with my Facebook account, but I don't remember doing that. But now you can access Instagram within Facebook. Facebook advertising is based on data about you. Facebook uses 98 different data points to target its advertising. It's also bought data from a range of data brokers probably like Equifax, I suspect, who recently had a major data breach. Your data is valuable. If you're from the States or Canada, you're worth $13.54, or you were at the beginning of January 2016. If you happen to live in Europe, you're only worth 1/3 of the average North American. Sorry about that. But these figures have been verified. As John Lanchester said in the London Review of Books just a month or so back, Facebook is in the surveillance business. It's the biggest surveillance-based enterprise in the history of mankind. It knows far, far more about you than the most intrusive government has ever known about its citizens. And data, says The Economist, is the new oil. Of course, their knowledge about you doesn't always work. I've been into my advert preferences. You can all go into your own advert preferences. When I clicked on the section of business and industry, it said one of my interests was hair products. A little unlikely. Not sure how they got that. Facebook has also been involved in behavioral manipulation. And I've given some examples here. In 2014, Facebook ran an experiment designed to see whether what it was doing would make people feel happier or more insecure. They did that without any of the normal data ethics that any university research would undertake. They ran a nudge experiment in 2014 to encourage more people to vote. They succeeded in getting 60,000 more people in the States to vote, and those 60,000 people posting a graphic they voted influenced others to vote. Jonathan Zittrain, professor of law at, I think, Harvard, said, on the basis of that, Facebook could decide an election without anyone finding out. Researchers from Cambridge and Stanford have done a lot of work to demonstrate that on the basis of 100 likes, Facebook likes, a computer can know more about your personality than your friends can. Work by Yu Kosinski and Stilwell here listed. And they've done that analysis looking at the ocean model, which is measuring traits of openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, and I'll come back to that later. This year, Facebook Australia tried to get advertisers to take advertising directed as teenagers by telling them that they could identify when teenagers feel insecure, insecure, worthless, and need a confidence boost. The creator of the Facebook like button now says he thinks there needs to be regulation of manipulative advertising. And there are an increasing number of books by neurologists and others who are suggesting that time spent on social media is affecting attention span, concentration, and cognitive capacity. Now, Facebook can take principled decisions on data usage. A year ago, Admiral Insurance said it was going to price car insurance based on Facebook posts, but within a day, Facebook had forced them to drop that plan. It's worth thinking about how the media industry has changed since the invention of the smartphone. Facebook launched in 2004, smartphone launches in 2007 with iPhone. Today, Facebook and Google dominate online advertising, especially mobile. The newspaper industry is clearly losing out. Increasingly, people are getting their news from Facebook. Facebook's become a major conduit for fake news. Fake news pays, and Facebook earns money from fake news. Facebook has often got its advertising metrics wrong, and its newsfeed algorithm will edit things by filtering. As Emily Bell, former Guardian journalist, director of the Tao Journalism School at Columbia University, said, people are increasingly using their smartphones for everything. They do it mostly through apps, and in particular, social and messaging apps such as Facebook, WhatsApp, Snapchat, and Twitter. Competitive advantage for platforms relies on being able to keep your users within an app. The more your users are within your app, the more you know about them, the more that information can then be used to sell advertising and to hire your revenues. Ben Evans, who's a bright young venture capitalist at Andreessen Horowitz in Silicon Valley, published this graph last week showing the extending reach of Facebook and Google in taking over advertising. As he said, Google and Facebook have well over half of digital ad revenue and all the growth. And if you look at the growth, the presentation there on the left is from Wall Street's guru of internet advertising, Mary Meeker. You can see that Facebook's growth in internet advertising was 62% between 2015 and 2016. Ender's analysis in the UK says that 90% of the growth in digital advertising in 2016 went to the two big players, Facebook and Google. And the sums are quite startling. Facebook 2012 advertising revenue from mobile was 470 million. In 2016, it was 22.85 billion. So, put this in wider context, TV is holding its position in advertising but internet advertising spending is predicted this year to overtake it. As you can see, it's the blue line is internet advertising. And of course, the newspaper industry is losing out radically. Newspaper advertising revenue in the States, got figures on the right for the States, peaked at around $67 billion in the early 2000s. It's now down to about 16.4 billion. Google, meanwhile, in that same period, is the red line. It's accelerated up to where newspaper advertising used to be, and Facebook is coming up itself. And we know in the UK, of course, the figures, we don't have the figures in quite the same way in the UK, but we know that many, many local newspapers are losing revenues and finding it difficult to stay alive. And increasingly, people get their news from Facebook. So it's estimated by the Pew Research Center that over 45% of people who use Facebook get their news from the site, but when you look at millennials, that rises to 61% of people getting their news from Facebook. Facebook is a major conduit for fake news. Even just 2 weeks ago, following the Las Vegas shooting, a whole series of fake news stories were posted on Facebook's safety check page about who the shooter actually was. And it's said that Facebook's algorithm, my colleagues in the Cardiff Business School will be pleased to hear me using the phrase algorithm, as I've been obsessed with it, as they know, for the last 12 months. Facebook's algorithm may have contributed to this process. In 2012, Facebook introduced the share button. Not long after that, fake news sites start to proliferate, noting that people often share items without checking them, without checking their veracity, particularly on mobile devices. And in the US presidential election, of course, there were a whole series of fake news stories. BuzzFeed said that fake news stories, engagement on Facebook with fake news stories, exceeded engagement with real stories in the latter period of the American presidential election campaign from August to November. And a variety of choice ones: Pope Francis shocks the world, endorses Donald Trump. WikiLeaks confirms Hillary sold weapons to ISIS. You know, these were some of those that were circulated. Fake news pays, and Facebook earns from it. Teens in the Balkans are duping Trump supporters with fake news. That was another BuzzFeed story. The little town of Veles in Macedonia, there were more than 100 pro-Trump websites earning money for teenagers. But also, yellow journalists in the States, opportunity comes in clicks and bucks. Professor David Carroll of the Design School in New York has said that the evidence is there that the Macedonian millionaires are still minting money from fake news today. Facebook has also regularly got its advertising metrics wrong and had to apologize for them about the number of people who are clicking on their videos. Indeed, Fortune magazine said at the end of last year, changes to Facebook ad metrics are now depressingly routine. Procter & Gamble, one of the biggest advertisers in the world, has said the days of giving digital a pass are over. Digital advertising fraud is estimated at $7 billion. Mark Thompson, former BBC Director General, now Chief Executive of the New York Times, has said the world of digital advertising is a nightmarish joke. And so you won't be able to see the story there from Fast Company, but Facebook has regularly reported the numbers of young people who are on its site as actually being bigger than the numbers of young people there are in the United States. And this has been repeated around the world. And recent evidence illustrates the dangers of uncontrolled Facebook advertising continue. ProPublica demonstrated just a few weeks ago that Facebook enabled advertisers to target what it called Jew haters. And it wasn't until they pointed it out that Facebook realized that. Shortly after Facebook stopped this targeting, Slate magazine found a whole series of other similarly hateful categories of Facebook of advertising available. The impact, of course, on news media organizations is significant. Most media organizations use Facebook. They have a dependency relationship with it. And they need to if they're going to reach audiences. But they are transferring revenue from media, from their own media, to Facebook and other intermediaries. The Press Gazette in this country is running a duopoly campaign about the activities of Facebook and Google. News Media Association in the UK has called for a competition authority inquiry into digital advertising. And in the States, the equivalent organization has called for the ability of news publishers to negotiate jointly together with Facebook, which they can't do at the moment. Several specific media groups, such as The Guardian and News Corporation, are lobbying on these issues. And I've given a lot of the references to these in a conference paper I did at the Cardiff Future Journalism Conference last month. As John Lanchester says, fake news, which gets more clicks and is free to produce, drives out real news, which often tells people things that they don't want to hear and is expensive to produce. The filter bubble and the echo chamber. The filter bubble is when algorithms channel or recommend content which an individual user is likely to agree with based on their previous behavior and interactions. The echo chamber is when people engage solely or mainly with those who share their views and block content from those they disagree with or unfollow them. They're concepts in widespread use now in analyzing Facebook. The digital sociologist Zeynep Tufekci, who's written about social media and social movements and frequently writes op-ed pieces in the New York Times, says of the 2016 presidential election, Facebook's algorithm is central to how news and information is consumed in the world today, and no historian will write about 2016 without it. You can read more about filter bubble in Eli Parisa's book and the echo chamber in Cass Sunstein's book called Republic. In politics, the filter bubble. Tom Steinberg is the founder of My Society. He put a Facebook post up the day after the Brexit referendum in which he said, "I am actively searching through Facebook for people celebrating the Brexit Leave victory, but the filter bubble is so strong and extends so far into things like Facebook's custom search that I can't find anyone who is happy, despite the fact that over half the country is clearly jubilant today and despite the fact that I'm actively looking to hear what they're saying." The Wall Street Journal did an experiment showing what a newsfeed would like if you were an American liberal, what it would look like if you were an American conservative. In the States, the liberal color is blue, the conservative color is red. Don't let that worry you. Now, it's an extreme way of doing it, but you can watch this in real time. The Facebook feeds are completely different. They have different versions of stories. They have totally different news stories prioritized. However, we need to remember, of course, it's not as though traditional media was blameless. In the UK, we know of all the tabloids who are running anti-EU stories. In the USA, as you can see from the graph at the end, the majority of coverage about Hillary Clinton was not about her policies, it was about her emails. But what does all of this mean for trust? Everybody is familiar with Michael Gove's saying that people in this country have had enough of experts. On Facebook, of course, everyone is an expert. There's been a recent report by the Amidjar group. Pierre Amidjar was one of the founders of eBay. He's now putting money into democratic media. It says the algorithms behind social media platforms convert popularity into legitimacy. I think it's an important phrase, popularity into legitimacy. And of course, President Obama said last year, as long as it's on Facebook and people can see it, as long as it's on social media, people start believing it, and it creates this dust cloud of nonsense. However, it's important not to get too carried away by fake news as a concept. There's 70 years of media effects research that shows people do not simply imbibe their views from the media. Their views are shaped by a complex series of social interactions. There's also evidence that online users may have more exposure diversity to different sources than others. There's actually little evidence, according to Oxford researchers, that online audiences are more fragmented than offline audiences. Some say trench warfare is a better metaphor than an echo chamber, and we know that other media is selective in reporting, that television remains the main news source for people. And from the 7-country study, Professor Bill Dutton has suggested that the panic over fake news, echo chambers and filter bubbles may be exaggerated and not supported by the evidence. Emily Bell at the Tow Centre has said earlier this year, while the fake news revelations of the 2016 election have forced social platforms to take greater responsibility for publishing decisions, this is a distraction from the larger issue that the structure and the economics of social platforms incentivize the spread of low-quality content over high-quality material. And now we turn to the Russians. In January 2017, the US intelligence community, which is 3 separate agencies, Homeland Security, CIA, and others, produced an assessment. It's been declassified. It was published for one of the congressional committees. We assess Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the US presidential election. Russia's goals were to undermine public faith in the US democratic process, denigrate Secretary Clinton, and harm her electability and potential presidency. We also assess Putin and the Russian government aspired to help President-elect Trump's election chances when possible by discrediting Secretary Clinton and publicly contrasting her unfavorably to him. All 3 agencies agree with this judgment. CIA and FBI have high confidence in this judgment. The NSA has moderate confidence. In April, Facebook's own security team produced a white paper on security which talks about fake news, but also talks about disinformation campaigns as well. But I'll come back to this April white paper. September, last month, Facebook admits that Russians bought advertising during the presidential election. They've handed them over to Congress. They've given the full details this month to Congress, showing that Russian-designed ads used custom audiences on Facebook, that they targeted certain cities like Baltimore to deepen racial tensions, that they backed other candidates like the Green Party candidate in the election, as well as Trump and Bernie Sanders. And CNN revealed this month that swing states like Michigan and Wisconsin were targeted by the Russians. And there's been an academic study by researchers again at Oxford showing that social media was particularly involved in polarizing people in the swing states. Interestingly, the day after the US election, 9th of November 2016, Maggie Haberman of the New York Times tweeted that a detail had got cut from their story on the final days of the election the other day, that Manafort, that's Paul Manafort, sent at least one memo advising Trump to focus on Wisconsin and Michigan. Paul Manafort chaired Trump's campaign until August 2016. He's a lobbyist for Russian interests and is now under investigation by Special Counsel Robert Mueller, whose agent searched his home in August. And NBC recently revealed he had a $60 million relationship with a Russian oligarch. October 2017, this month again, the Wall Street Journal revealed that in that April report I showed you a moment ago, Facebook cut the references to Russia from the report that they published because of concerns amongst the company's lawyers and members of its policy team. The drafting of the report sparked internal debate about how much information to disclose about Russian mischief on Facebook and its efforts to affect US public opinion during the 2016 presidential contest. Questions. Facebook says that 10 million people saw Russian Facebook advertising. However, Professor Jonathan Albright of the Tau Center at Columbia managed to get hold of a lot of the data and ran his own calculations. He estimated that the content had been shared 340 million times, far beyond what Facebook was saying at Facebook's 10 million. Now, one caveat, Dave Karpf of George Washington University in the States says that, in fact, of course, some of those clicks on that material could have come from bots. So, there's no way of knowing how many, but clearly probably a lot more than Facebook was saying. However, Facebook's reaction has been to take down the data so that academics and other researchers can no longer look into it. Next month, Facebook will be giving evidence before Congress, and they've been running full-page media ads this month in the New York Times, Washington Post, and other newspapers in the States. Interestingly, since 2011, they have been fighting the disclosure of who is paying for their advertising, and they've resisted calls from the Federal Election Commission and others to explain precisely who is paying for their advertising. Now, where does this take us to? It takes us to Brexit. There is a company called Cambridge Analytica that worked for, firstly, Senator Ted Cruz, and then for Donald Trump in the election campaign in the States. They are a data analytic and targeting company. They target advertising. There was an exposure in the Observer earlier this year, which explained some of the background to the company. I must say at this point that the article is the subject of legal complaints on behalf of Cambridge Analytica and SCL Elections. I don't know which parts of the article are subject to legal complaints, so I'll give you the headlines. A stake in the company is owned by the Trump-supporting billionaire Robert Mercer, who gave £10 million to Trump's election guru, Steve Bannon, to found the right-wing news site Breitbart. Steve Bannon sat on the board of Cambridge Analytica. We know the Trump campaign spent $70 million on Facebook advertising, $70 million, mostly in the last 4 months of the campaign, according to its digital director, and they ran 100,000 different versions of those advertisements. Trump campaign advertising allegedly ran voter suppression ads designed to reduce turnout amongst pro-Clinton groups. Now, this takes us then to Brexit and a company called Aggregate IQ. Aggregate IQ was the beneficiary of £3.9 million worth of spending by the official Vote Leave campaign, and the DUP and others spent money with them. Carol Cadwallader, the journalist from The Observer, reported that a source emailed me to say that he had found that Aggregate IQ's address and telephone number corresponded to a company listed on Cambridge Analytica's website as its overseas office, SCL Canada. A day later, that online reference vanished. She also says it was from Facebook that Cambridge Analytica obtained its vast data set in the first place. And they used work that psychologists at Cambridge had developed for research purposes. That was the research I referred to earlier about the ability to understand people's traits from their Facebook likes. And they did further research work as well. Cambridge Analytica denies that they've ever used that research. There it is again on the right. But one campaigner has posted a YouTube video of one of the employees of this company talking about their use of Facebook likes. So, the Observer alleges the links between Cambridge Analytica, Aggregate IQ, the Leave.eu campaign, which was not the official campaign, and Vote Leave. Brexit, Aggregate IQ, how a tiny Canadian IT company helped swing the Brexit vote for Leave, Telegraph article. On the Aggregate IQ website, and you can still find this today, quote from Dominic Cummings, the campaign director of Vote Leave, without a doubt, the Vote Leave campaign owes a great deal of its success to the work of Aggregate IQ. We couldn't have done it without them. These graphs are taken from Dominic Cummings' website, and you can see how the Vote Leave campaign focused very much on Facebook and other social media in the last few weeks of the campaign. And what Dominic Cummings, by the way, deleted his Twitter account a week or so back. Nobody quite knows why, everybody's interested. But on his website he said, we focused most of this money in the last 10 days and on about 9 million persuadables, not our core voters, identified by the data science team from a variety of sources with a variety of methods, some very simple and some very sophisticated. That group was on the receiving end of a barrage of 350 million, stroke NHS, stroke Turkey, mostly in a small time window. And you can find that on his website still today. There is a court case underway against the Electoral Commission at the moment to find out whether there was conjoining of different campaigns and whether, as a result of that, Vote Leave may have breached its spending limits. It's been prosecuted by Joe Morn QC. The Information Commissioner has an inquiry going on into the use of political data. I emailed them last week to find out the current position. They said, our contact with Cambridge Analytica remains ongoing, and this is part of the wider investigation into the use of data analytics for political purposes announced by the Information Commissioner on the 17th of May. Now, let's not get too paranoid about this. There is no inevitability about who wins on Facebook. The evidence from the May-June election is that there was far more engagement with Labour Facebook pages, both of the party and of the leader, than with Conservatives. So skillful data teams exist in all campaigns. It was President Obama's campaign in 2008 and then subsequently 2012, which probably pioneered the use of data. The issue is not who benefits from it. The issue is the control of it, its transparency, and its regulation. But today, Facebook, of course, is being widely criticised as a partisan platform, as an extremist, terrorist, criminal hate speech platform, as a fake news platform, as a hostile state platform for getting its ad metrics regularly wrong, because ads on its platform bypass electoral law for data abuses and for allowing its algorithmic power to suppress content. The European Union fined Facebook earlier this year 110 million euros over its merger with WhatsApp and some of the data issues that resulted from that. A year or so ago, the Norwegian newspaper Aftenposten was asked by Facebook to take down this iconic war image from the Vietnam War. Jeremy Oliver, who's a senior regulator at Ofcom, used this as in a presentation at the European Parliament. I think he was a colleague of ours in the BBC in the mid-90s. Anyway, one of the problems is algorithmic identification. Is this a picture of a naked child or is it an iconic war photojournalism issue? Aftenposten obviously have carried on using it and eventually got Facebook to back down. The BBC earlier this year sent Facebook material showing that child pornography was available on its site. Facebook reported the BBC to the police. This month, Germany's hate speech social media law has now come into effect. Earlier this week, the head of MI5 says tech firms have a moral duty to stop terrorist activity on their sites. Researchers at the LSE have called for more supervision and regulation of electoral advertising on social media here, and there's also a consultation going on in the States by the Federal Election Commission saying, should political ads on Facebook include disclaimers? Has Facebook taken steps to deal with these issues? Well, yes. Since November the 8th, 2016, Facebook's announced a number of steps trying to block advertising to fake news sites, working with fact checkers, and flagging up contested and challenged news, claiming recently that they were now stopping people clicking on those sites about 80% of the time and hiring more staff. Further 9 steps taken at the end of September, including making political ads from Facebook pages visible, strengthening their previewing of political advertising, and yet more staff. But to many of us, it seems like too little, too late. There's a patchwork of Facebook regulation in the UK. Competition, obviously, regulated by the Competition and Markets Authority, election advertising by the Electoral Commission, behaviour and other advertising by the Advertising Standards Authority. There would be a role for Ofcom, I'll come to that. Data, obviously, by the Information Commissioner. Age and appropriate content now by the British Board of Film Classification. possibly data ethics in future by a new Data Ethics Commission. Dame Patricia Hodgson, another former BBC colleague from the 1990s, now chair of Ofcom, said, "My personal view is that they are publishers, but that is only my personal view, that is not an Ofcom view." The chief executive of Ofcom last month said, "I don't think regulation is the answer, because I think it's really hard to navigate the boundary between regulation and censorship of the internet," which is exactly, of course, what the social media companies themselves say. It's their language. Regulatory issues are difficult. There's a whole series of quite complicated issues about whether users can switch, whether there are bottleneck effects, what we know about the algorithms, a whole series of issues you can list. Clearly, powerful players, as I say in the last point, have the ability to leverage data in one market to achieve enhanced power in other markets. And bear in mind, one of the companies Facebook has bought is called Oculus, which is in virtual reality. So no doubt we'll see further challenges from Facebook in due course. There are difficulties of regulation. The OECD says there are difficulties of using traditional competition policy tests, such as market definition, when you have zero prices, in other words, where customers are essentially paying through their attention and their data, not through money. Professor Diane Coyle has admitted that economists have for now left competition authorities with more questions than answers, and we know competition investigations are notoriously complex and slow moving, and it's hard to capture internet intermediaries within traditional measures of media plurality. In France, this week, the Conseil National du Numérique, which is France's data regulatory body, digital regulatory body, has announced a public consultation on the platforms. There's a very good YouTube video. It's in French, but it has English subtitles. It's well worth watching as to where the French are going with this. Facebook, of course, is also under pressure on tax, as are Apple, Google, Amazon, and many other big tech companies from Europe. France and Germany are suggesting that these companies should be taxed on the basis of their turnover, not on their profits. And you'll see the reason why immediately. This is from Facebook's reporting last year, their advertising revenue by user geography. You can't see the small print, so I've picked it out in red. We discovered an error in the algorithm we used to attribute our revenue by user geography in late 2015. While this issue did not affect our overall worldwide revenue, it did affect our attribution of revenue to different geographic regions. In other words, the algorithm was hiding where Facebook was getting its money from. How do we know what Facebook algorithms are really telling us? So, my view is that Facebook is now so powerful, we should stop worrying about whether it is a media company or not. I think it is a media company. But accept what Mark Zuckerberg says. Facebook is a new kind of platform. It's a social utility, he says. It's social infrastructure, he says. It's critical social infrastructure, he says. He said that in the Secrets of Silicon Valley BBC film just a few weeks ago. Well, if it's critical social infrastructure, then let's regulate it as a communications utility. It is that powerful, it requires that level of regulation. In 2012, former Ofcom senior regulator Robin Foster, who also worked with me in the BBC in the 1990s, there's a pattern here, called for statutory underpinning of the position of internet intermediaries like Facebook, and he gave a number of potential proposals as to what could be done. And the former Ofcom chief executive, Ed Richards, who also worked with me in the BBC in the 1990s, the pattern continues, suggested that where Ofcom has power, i.e. legal power, it has the power to nudge people to do things and nudge them away from doing things that they shouldn't do. But of course, at the moment, Facebook, Google, and others are not captured within communications regulation in the UK or the EU in that way. Anyway, you can regulate Facebook, but that doesn't safeguard our media. So, there are other proposals we need. We need a levy on the advertising revenues of the Facebook-Google duopoly, as has been suggested by the Media Reform Coalition. And of course, Channel 4 and S4C were once both funded in a similar way. We know that Norway has managed to maintain a very strong local newspaper industry supported by media subsidies to ensure media plurality. And as we suggested in our task force report for the presiding officer, there are other ways in which the Assembly could support media, giving new sources of media content for local and hyper-local publishers. Because the Assembly is a content platform. It provides facts, information, data, commentary, and opinion and analysis, both written and audiovisual, that could be used for other media organizations. So, is it Facebook or Fakebook, or, forgive my Russian accent, Facebooka? Over to you. Thank you.
Some questions now. Does anybody cymryd cwpl o gwestiynau nawr? Roedd hwnna'n ddiddorol iawn, diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much. It was really interesting, I think, for many of us. Do we have some questions that we can throw to Leighton Andrews? Who's going to start? Who's going to have the confidence to give us a first question? Angela.
I'd like you to expand on your penultimate slide about what Wales can do, because I think you've made you've given us an enormous amount of information to consider. So what can we do? I would love you to take the time to elaborate on that.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to say is that Bethan announced, beginning of her talk, the money that's been agreed by the Assembly for hyperlocal publishers. In the past, the Assembly has invested in community radio, for example. The development of Golwg 360 was supported by money from the Assembly via the Welsh Books Council. So the Assembly has taken subsidy options in the past to support the media. It's not technically within the Assembly's remit, but of course it has the freedom to do those things. I think the Assembly itself as an institution, this is what our report said, has got to refocus its communications so that it is about channeling information about what is happening in this place as a public democratic space in ways that people will want to access. There are interesting things going on in committees that people never hear about through the established media in Wales, partly for space reasons, partly for attention reasons, but partly sometimes because they no longer employ reporters who are looking for those stories. So the Assembly itself, quite concretely, I think, can provide subsidies in different forms, both financial and resource forms.
Does that satisfy, or do you want to come back with some views? I know you have views, so you can... I mean, when we had Ken Skates, the Cabinet Secretary, into our committee last week, he was saying that he'd like to work with the Assembly Commission on some sort of news wire for Wales. What's your view on that type of suggestion?
Well, I'd rather not respond directly to that question, but to go back to ask Leighton to be broader again, because what the Assembly can do about its own output is fascinating, and we need to think about that. But Ender's analysis, for instance, is able to give us a sort of international context to this issue. So yes, the Assembly can do what you're suggesting about its own communication with the public, but this is a huge context question, isn't it? So if I can, that's a sort of second part to the question. How does a small country like Wales deal with a huge topic like this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say a small country like Norway, in size terms, has actually done very well in terms of media, particularly newspaper subsidies. I don't think the Assembly can do it on its own. I think there are issues of UK-wide and EU regulation that come into play here. If you were going to have a levy on the internet intermediaries and their dominance of digital and particularly mobile advertising, that would need to be done at a UK level. So I think, this is about partnership, this is about institutions working together to deliver those kind of changes. But I think the starting point, to some extent, has got to be to politicise these issues.
Thank you. Question, second row, third row, even.
Leighton, it's a shattering presentation, I have to say. It's creepy, it's scary in all kinds of ways. I just have something in the back of my mind, a sort of a worry about what you're proposing in terms of the Assembly. Nick Davis at Cardiff University some years ago did some groundbreaking work on what he called journalism. And when you actually compared the copy in newspapers with the copy of press releases from corporations, there was a very, very high correlation. And of course, in much the same way as with Facebook, with no attribution of that source. Isn't it a worry if newspapers or other media start incorporating material from an assembly source in a kind of government journalism? Should we not be worried about that?
Well, the argument we made in the document was that, firstly, it's not about the government. It's about the Assembly as a democratic space, representative of a wide range of views across Wales, generating material. And I think the problem is where we are now, because there's the situation Nick Davis described through journalism has got worse. There are fewer journalists available. We look back, and we say this in the report, we look back to the early days of devolution, to when you and others were setting up the broadcasting for the Assembly and BBC and ITV, with significantly more resource, with almost a devolution dividend, as it was called at the time. And those days are over. There used to be a dedicated Western Mail reporter, a dedicated Daily Post reporter. Those days have long gone. So in a sense, we want to get some of that news out there, and our remit was very much about how does the Assembly engage with and communicate with wider Wales. I think you need to look at other ways and other routes and ensure that material is infiltrated into social media and other outlets. Now, there are a number of ways you could do that. You could contract for that work to be done in the way that Golub 360 has been contracted through the Wales Books Council. Our suggestion initially was that this should be done in-house by a team of journalists here, but that wouldn't have to be the route. There could be other routes. But I do think it's important to make that distinction between the National Assembly as the democratic forum with different voices and the voice of a government, which would be Pravda, as you suggest.
I guess you could argue...
I'm not sure I'd buy that.
I guess you could argue that the Assembly would still need that, to be devil's advocate, I guess you would argue that you would still need to have that scrutiny from the Assembly, because Welsh Government is one thing, but the Assembly is another. We have our own messaging, we have our own potential inbuilt propaganda in that sense. So wouldn't that be dangerous?
Well, I think that's something you'd have to guard against, which is why I think you'd have to have an independent editor heading this process. But, if I think about it, you have, say, the BMA coming to give evidence to the Health Committee. They may be producing original research for their input to the Health Committee. That material should be seen more widely. So it can become a platform for groups who are giving evidence to the Assembly. I think there's a whole series of ways that this could be done creatively. I suspect people will edge ultimately towards a more independent way of doing this. But our remit was to think about this in the context of the Assembly's engagement with the people of Wales.
Okay. I saw a gentleman in the front there, yes, thank you.
Microphone.
Yn y cyd-destun Cymreig yn enwedig, ydych chi'n meddwl bod gan addysg mewn ysgolion ac addysg oedolion hefyd, rôl i chwarae i wrthbwyso y diffygion enbyd yma yn y cyfryngau a newyddiaduraeth, mwyn sicrhau bod pobl Cymru yn gallu ymgysylltu'n democrataidd yn effeithiol?
Wel, ie, dwi'n cytuno gyda hynny, wrth gwrs. Yng Nghymru, mae gyda ni fframwaith competence digidol. Dyn ni wedi cyflwyno hynny yn y goffennol agos. A mae fframwaith yn helpu pobl ifanc i deall sut mae'n digwydd yn ein cyfrwng ar hyn o bryd. Mae'n bwysig i cefnogi hynny. Dwi'n meddwl bod ni wedi dechrau'r proses, a mae'n bwysig bod ni'n parhau y proses.
Gentleman, the back there, yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm Denabo from University of South Wales. My question is, it sounds like some countries in the Western Hemisphere, like Norway and Germany, are taking actions to regulate Facebook. What kind of message does that signal with regard to democracy and freedom of speech to citizens of countries like China or Northern Korea or Eritrea, where Facebook is taken almost hostage by authorities in those countries. And my second question is, in some countries, it looks like diplomacy is conducted by Twitter. And so I was wondering, where does this lead to with regard to social media? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
On the first question, the BBC revealed sometime last year that Facebook had actually been developing a censorship tool for use in China, should they be able to go into China. So let's not kid ourselves that Facebook is immune from the censorship role itself. It does censor. In fact, you can go onto Facebook and it reports on the requests that different governments around the world have made to it to take down material. So that is already happening around the world. I think we need to make a distinction between the regulation of major players who have significant monopoly power, such as Facebook, such as Google, from the regulation of the internet more widely. And I think that's an important starting point. In Germany, they have had, for good reason and for 60 years, strong laws against hate speech. So what they have done is now take those laws that exist in the offline environment into the social media environment. And therefore, Facebook or any other social media operator could be fined 50 million euros, I think it is, in extreme cases. The Digital Economy Bill in the UK has put down some, the Digital Economy Act, I think now is, UK has put down some criteria for addressing some issues with social media companies already. So some of this, at that level, is happening. What concerns me is that we have a patchwork of regulation that isn't strong enough to deal with very powerful players. Of course, those issues are going to come up, but they are already coming up. Facebook is already taking down content at the behest of other governments, and we know that it's already designed its own censorship tools to try and get it into China. So I kind of think that there isn't a simple either-or in this situation. There is a spectrum already that exists. In terms of diplomacy and, well, what we know, what we've seen is that Russia is engaged, for example, in the opposite of diplomacy, if you like. It's engaged in very serious disinformation campaigns designed to provoke distrust in governments, in democracy, and in authority in a variety of states. And that's been borne out by what we've seen in the US. It's been borne out by what we've seen in other countries too. And there were strenuous efforts taken both France and Germany to avoid these things happening during their own recent elections.
Okay. I think there was somebody in the back there, so this gentleman in the green jumper first.
Thank you, Ian David, Wales Government Centre. If I can bring you back to Wales again, I think we have two problems in Wales, which is a limited media infrastructure, but also that maybe politicians aren't using the media very skillfully. And I wonder if, because the thing is, if an assembly member has something interesting to say, that will get reported. And often if they don't have anything interesting to say, that will get reported as well. So I wonder if the politicians in Wales need to take more responsibility.
Well,
Give us an example. Go on.
Go on. Will they be reported? Sometimes they'll be reported. I think the issue for me is the quality and depth of analysis of issues. So I think things are often reported very much in headline terms, and that's true not just in the print media, but it's probably true in the broadcast as well, because broadcast news in a half an hour of Wales Today, half an hour of Wales Tonight, doesn't give you a lot of time to go into issues in real depth. The audiences on the current affairs programs are small. They don't get into that level of depth either. And I think you can, if you are prepared to take the time, utilise a variety of different kinds of media in Wales. But that infrastructure, as you say, isn't strong in the first place. It isn't as strong as the infrastructure that exists in Scotland, and it's getting weaker, and that is part of the problem here. Now, you know, Assembly members have made very good use of Facebook, for example, and so they should. It's very easy to advertise on Facebook. I've done it myself in the past. You know, I'm not saying people should not use Facebook, but what I am saying is I don't think there will ever be a competitor to Facebook. Therefore, there will never be competitive pressure on it. Therefore, I think the regulation environment around it has to be stronger. Should politicians? Well, yeah, some politicians are going to be better at others at getting media coverage. You know, I can see a couple in the room who have always been pretty successful at getting media coverage. More than a couple, I think. I didn't have that many problems myself.
If I can answer...
Perhaps the opposite.
If I can say something, I think quite often we say that obviously we believe there's a democratic deficit, but I think as well that Assembly members and their teams have to put more effort in engaging the press, not only in Wales but on a UK level. I think if you take a story to them and they can see that there is depth and merit in it, then they will go with that. I think it's just sometimes we potentially won't have that time. I know next week I'll be working on something quite substantial with a UK broadcaster, but that's taken a lot of time to try and encourage them to take an interest, to give them something new that hasn't been already in the Welsh press. And I think, you know, it just depends if you're on 3 committees and if you're on doing juggling 20 million other things, can you invest that time? But also I think I agree that sometimes some of the things that are churned out are not of great value either, and so of course the journalists are going to just say, well, actually, please give us something worth covering. So
I think that point Bethan makes is really important as well, because, you know, there is a Scottish media environment. There is a London national newspaper media environment which, you know, cuts across England and Wales, but is not a public sphere for discussion of issues in Wales. You know, talking with some colleagues earlier on this evening about the Times is currently doing a series on higher education. One of the colleagues, Debbie, was saying, well, they're reporting today that the universities minister, Joe Johnson, is making radical proposals for British higher education. Well, no, he's not. He's making proposals for English higher education, some of which may have a knock-on effect, of course, for Wales. And there is a lack of that understanding. You know, The Guardian occasionally gets it, most of the time doesn't. BBC has invested resources in this area, still doesn't always get it right. It does a better job on the whole of explaining this. But there is not a Welsh public sphere, a Welsh media environment where many of these issues can be debated, where there is in Scotland. And there is a Westminster media environment as well.
Okay. Tim, I think there's a question here in the third row as well. I'll take 2 at a time because I don't think there's much time left. But if we can
yeah, just a quick one. I'm interested in the Norway, the way Norway is going about media plurality, and also a sort of Geraint's point about, you know, a government news. I'm just reminded of going to see Spencer Feeney down at the South Wales Evening Post many years ago when I was working for government here, begging him, you know, please keep Brian and let's have some news in the Evening Post from the Assembly. And he said, why, Tim? Why on earth would I want to put it in the paper when no one is interested? So I think we need a reality check on that. But also, if there were to be a news provider sponsored by public money, it should be for news generally. And you look at what's happening in Powys County Council, for example. Stories which are not being covered, which should be, that it should be not specifically for the Assembly, but a newswire, which might make it more palatable, in Geraint's view, you know, that we're not government or Assembly paying for it. So it's just trying to widen that out and saying it would be a wire service in the widest possible way, either for digital content or for use by anyone else. I don't know whether you've got any view on that.
Yeah.
I had one in the third row here as well.
John Geraint, I used to work with you in the BBC in the 90s. Your presentation focused, understandably, on news and journalism. But I guess most people who go to Facebook don't see themselves as going for a news source or for journalism. Okay. They see it as a kind of social and cultural thing, yes, as you recognise at the beginning. Now, those of us who care about public service broadcasting have long made the argument that Wales needs to be reflected in public service broadcasting beyond news and current affairs in all kinds of other programming. Are we jumping too far ahead if we're wondering about making a case, if there is a levy on Facebook, for that to be used more broadly than simply for news?
Well, I think that's a fair point. I mean, we know that most people go to Facebook for friends and family information. However, we also know they are being fed a diet of advertising which doesn't really look like advertising, not all of which you can tell who has sourced the original material. We also know that when, as I said, when material gets shared from other news organisations, the logos often don't follow. So there are issues, I think, about Facebook and its role in news communications for our democracy that matter, regardless of whether they are on everybody's lips, as it were, and matter to everybody who uses Facebook. I think those are issues that society has to engage with. Yes, I mean, you know, I would like to see the debate being not just around news, but around wider broadcasting interests and values. But I think it is, Wales has a particular news deficit, which I do think needs addressing. We pick up Tim's point. I mean, you know, we wanted to start the debate with a report, and we knew this proposal. We debated it internally in the task force. We knew it was going to be controversial. You know, we knew it was going to be controversial, but we had to. We wanted that people to engage with the report. It's one of the things I think has made people engage with the report. In terms of Norway has got 250 local newspapers, and this media subsidy business isn't recent. They've been doing it for years. You know, it's been there as part of their culture. And I've been discussing this with academics in Norway in conferences over the summer. It's a really, you know, what they've achieved has been impressive. They've had to justify it. Sometimes it's seen as a state aid, for example. But it has meant that they have kept a diversity and plurality of media, even in really small communities in Norway. And I think that's to be commended and supported, and maybe we can learn from that. Okay, I'm afraid if you want to ask any more questions, you have to do it over drinks afterwards, because we need to end now. Diolch yn fawr iawn I bawb am ddod. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you can be engaged in the topics that we've talked about today. But thank you once again, Leighton Andrews. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you. Thanks very much indeed. Let's see.